The law of publicity. The birth of a brand is achieved with publicity, not advertising. Most of America's 5,208 advertising agencies are committed to the concept of building a brand with advertising. The fundamental thing we are all doing about is building brand leaders, said the chief executive of Darcy Masias Benton and Bowles recently. The way to do that is to have a superior understanding of the customer, which leads to better, fresher, more powerful creative work that ultimately builds brands. Building brand leaders with better, fresher creative work, we think not. Most marketers confuse brand building with brand maintenance. While a hefty advertisement budget might be needed to maintain high-flying brands like McDonald's and Coca-Cola, advertising generally won't get a new brand off the ground. Anita Roddick built up Body Shop into a major brand with no advertising. Instead, she traveled the world on a relentless quest for publicity, pushing her ideas about the environment. It was the endless torrent of newspaper and magazine articles, plus radio and television interviews that literally created the Body Shop brand. Starbucks doesn't spend a hill of beans on advertising either. In 10 years, the company has spent less than $10 million on advertising, a trivial amount for a brand that delivers annual sales approaching $1 billion. Walmart became the world's largest retailer with sales approaching $100 billion with very little advertising. A Walmart sibling, Sam's Club, averages $45 million per store with almost no advertising. On the other hand, Miller Brewing spent $50 million to launch a brand called Miller Regular, or just plain Miller. The brand generally no publicity, almost no perceptions in the minds of beer drinkers, and very little sales. $50 million down the drain. Would better, fresher creative work have built a beer called Miller Regular into a brand leader? We think not. There is no publicity potential in a regular beer with a line extended name like Miller. In the past, it may have been true that a beefy advertising budget was the key ingredient in the brand building process. But what worked in the past doesn't necessarily work today. We live in an over-communicated society where each of us gets hit with hundreds of commercial messages daily. Today, brands are born, not made. A new brand must be capable of generating favorable publicity in the media, or you don't have a chance in the marketplace. And just how do you generate publicity? The best way to generate publicity is by being first. In other words, by being the first brand in a new category. Bennett, the first adhesive bandage. Charles Schwab, the first discount stock brokerage firm. CNN, the first cable news network. Compaq, the first portable personal computer. Domino's, the first home delivery pizza chain. ESPN, the first cable sports network. Gore-Tex, the first breathable waterproof cloth. Heineken, the first imported beer. Hearst, the first car rental company. Intel, the first microprocessor. Zello, the first guillotine dessert. Kentucky Fried Chicken, the first fast food chicken chain. National Enquirer, the first supermarket tabloid. Playboy, the first men's magazine. Q-tips, the first cotton swab. Reynolds Wrap, the first aluminum foil. Rollerblade, the first inline skate. Samuel Adams, the first microbrewed beer. Saran Wrap, the first plastic food wrap. Sun Microsystem, the first Unix workstation. Tide, the first detergent. Time, the first weekly news magazine. Xerox, the first plain paper copy. All of these brands and many more were first in a new category and in the process generated enormous amounts of publicity. There is a strong relationship between the two. The news media wants to talk about what's new, what's first, and what's hot, not what's better. When a brand can make news, it has a chance to generate publicity, and the best way to make news is to announce a new category, not a new product. What others say about a brand is so much more powerful than what you can say about it yourself. That's why publicity in general is more powerful than advertising. And why over the past 2 decades public relations has eclipsed advertising as the most powerful force in branding. Yet for hours public relations has been treated as a secondary function to advertising. PR people even used to measure their success in terms of advertising space. Publicity stories were converted into equivalent advertising expenditures. Even worse, marketing strategies were usually formulated first into advertising slogans, then the public relations. People were asked to reinforce the advertising by creating PR programs to communicate the slogans. Not anymore. Today, brands are built with publicity and maintained with advertising. The crowd is not driving the horse. So, why hasn't the ascendancy of PR made news in the media? Why are public relations departments in most companies still subservient to advertising departments? Why are 8 of the top 10 public relations firms still owned by advertising agencies instead of vice versa? Why has the media ignored the biggest story in marketing? It is a crash phenomenon. Nobody ever notices the grass growing or pays attention to a trend that is slow in developing. Take the facsimile for example. Over the past 2 decades, the facsimile has become an indispensable part of every company's communication portfolio. Americans will spend 65 billion pages of faxes this year, more than 240 per person, and 50% of all international phone calls are now fax calls. Yet we don't remember a single article in any of the major management publications on the rise of the facsimile. It happened too slowly. On the other hand, the opposite is true of the internet. The rise of the internet happened so quickly that it created a blaze of publicity, and yet even today, the average executive is more likely to send a fax than an email. Advertising executives in particular are inclined to slight public relations. If the advertising is brilliant, the PR will fall out of that, said one particularly brilliant advertising executive recently. But what works in branding today is publicity, not advertising. This is especially true in the high-tech field. All of the big global marketing powerhouses like Microsoft, Intel, Dell, Compaq, Gateway, Oracle, Cisco, SAP, and Sun Microsystems were first created in the pages of the Wall Street Journal, Business Week, Forbes, and Fortune by publicity, not by advertising. Years ago, we worked with Lotus Development Corp on branding strategy for Lotus Notes. The essence of the strategy was the promotion of Notes as the first successful groupwear product, with of course the emphasis on groupwear. This idea caught on like crazy with the media, which ran story after story on the new groupwear concept. Yet typically the Lotus advertising people ignore the groupwear idea in favor of nonsensical advertising peplum. It didn't matter because public relations is more important than advertising. As a result of the publicity program, Notes became an enormous success, and as a result, IPM paid the astounding price of $3.5 billion for Lotus Development Corp. Most companies develop their branding strategies as if advertising were their primary communications vehicle. They are wrong. Strategies should be developed first from a publicity point of view. The law of publicity.